Okay, sorry, Felicity, I've just taken back the host, so I'm making you the host again.
I haven't got my, hold on a moment, I haven't got my thing. Let's see, no, that's not it. I had it before.
You go share screen.
Yeah, I can't get the talk. I just had it. Behind there. No, it's not. Right, I've got it here. Oh, I haven't got me.
You seem to have lost Jamie.
Oh, good evening, Charlie.
Hello.
We're kicking off, but Felicity's just getting her presentation up.
I've got this presentation up, but I can't see you now.
Yeah, we can't see your presentation on the screen yet.
Right, okay, let's zoom and see Norton. There. Sorry. Oh, I had it. Sorry.
That's all right.
I can't see where I'm going wrong either.
Do you want to make me the host again, and we'll try from scratch again?
Right, join meeting. Oh. Right. Share. No, there we are. I don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't need that. Don't need that.
That's it.
I want that.
That's it.
But
wonderful.
I don't want that. Have you got that bit at the bit?
Yeah, we're up and running for this, Steve.
Okay, let's go.
Let's do it.
Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hey. Well, many of you will know this painting, but not so many of you know that it was painted by a woman. And that is who I'd like to talk about, Elizabeth Butler, a genteel Victorian lady who almost exclusively painted battle pictures, from Waterloo, like this one, Scotland Forever, to the Crimean War, Afghanistan, the Boer War, through and including the First World War. Well, let's start at the very beginning. I'll come back to this one later, and here's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Thompson was born near Lausanne in 1846. Her sister Alice was born a year later. She married Wilfred Meynell, so became Alice Meynell. Wilfred Meynell was an Irish poet, and she too wrote poetry and journalism. Now, their parents were Thomas and Christiana Thompson. They were introduced to each other by Charles Dickens. Thomas was a gentleman of private means. He'd inherited a sum of money from his grandfather on condition that he didn't work. So he took to traveling throughout Europe, pursuing his own cultural interests. But this meant that from 1851, the two girls spent much of their childhood constantly on the move. And they tended to spend the winter months in Italy, seems like a good idea, and the summers in England. But he didn't own a property in England, so they lived in Kent, the Isle of Wight, Henley, Cheltenham, London, and so on. They didn't go to school. They were educated by their father. He had been to Cambridge. Elizabeth's art education was patchy. At the age of 15, she had oil painting lessons from a Mr. William Standish, and he got her to do copies of Landseer's horses' heads, and they stood her in good stead. Shortly afterwards, she enrolled at the elementary class of the Female School of Art in South Kensington. But she disliked the design-orientated syllabus there and soon left. She was given patterns to copy and things like that. For the next 3 years, she had no formal training, but continued to sketch and paint as the family travelled. Here are some early sketches she did, and you can see she was already drawing soldiers. In 1866, so now in her 20th year, she returned to the Female School of Art, this time attending the advanced classes. And she started to have paintings exhibited at the Dudley Gallery in London and the Society of Female Artists. 3 years later, we're up to 1869 now. She had lessons in Florence from Giuseppe Bellucci. He would only allow her to paint in monochrome. The following year, she submitted her painting of the Magnificat to the Pope's annual exhibition in Rome. It was accepted. And so the following year, after her final term at the School of Art in South Kensington, she submitted it to the Royal Academy with a certain amount of confidence. If it was good enough for the Pope, surely it was good enough for the Royal Academy. But it was not. The painting was refused. And what was worse, it was returned to her with a hole in it. The following year, she submitted another painting, but again, it was rejected. Undaunted, the third year, she submitted another one, and this one was accepted. But it was skied. What do I mean by skied? Well, it was hung high up on the wall. Here's a painting of the Royal Academy painted 8 years later, and just look how high some of the paintings are. You can see that arch there. We'll have a close-up of the arch. Here we go. You can see just how high some of the paintings were. Well, no one was going to see her painting. Well, Elizabeth continued to send watercolours to the Dudley Gallery, and one was bought by a Manchester businessman. I have to concentrate here. His name is Charles Galloway. I keep wanting to say George, but I think he was quite a different character. And he commissioned another painting from her, a battle painting. As a woman, she might have chosen to paint something feminine. Let's say, what about Lady Richmond's ball on the night before the Battle of Waterloo? No, that had already been done. Elizabeth was made of stronger stuff. She painted a much more somber scene of Crimea. A roll call was submitted to the Royal Academy and accepted. Success at last. What's more, it was hung on the line at eye level. Charles Galloway was so pleased with it that he increased the payment for it from £100 to 126. Well, it doesn't sound very much. It would equate to about 8,000 today. It's more than I get for mine. At the banquet on the opening night, the Prince of Wales praised the painting. And following his speech, crowds thronged around the picture, so many that a policeman had to be stationed in front of it to protect it and the paintings on either side. And that had only happened twice before. Well, the picture shows exhausted Grenadier Guardsmen standing in the snow. The exact location was not determined, but it was thought to be Inkerman. The Battle of Inkerman was protracted. The 3rd Battalion, the Grenadier Guards, had defended the 2-gun sandbag battery against heavy odds. There was 3 hours of fierce combat before the Russians retreated. The Grenadier Guards were victorious, but their losses were heavy. 104 killed, 130 wounded. The adjutant, Captain George Higginson, that's him on the mounted officer, recalled that barely 200 responded at roll call. I've checked with the National Army Museum. The battalion's strength was 1,000 at Crimea. Incidentally, Captain Higginson survived the battle and lived to 100 years of age and retired as a general. Well, what have we got here? We've got a muster of guardsmen while the roll call is read by the sergeant. He himself has been wounded. Another man has fallen. We don't know, has he died or just fainted? This is an image depicting the courage of the British soldiers, painted in somber colours, an example of understated emotion. Elizabeth wanted to ensure that the picture was historically accurate. The models she used were mostly ex-soldiers. The model for the sergeant calling the roll had actually seen service in Crimea. Well, let's have a closer look at the pictures if we were in a gallery going up close. And here we have a young soldier looking vacant. Is that shell shock or PTSD that we'd call it now? Another one, another guardsman is consoling a fellow soldier with his head in his arms, another bandaging his own wrist, and still another exhausted, leaning on a fellow guardsman. The picture was taken to Windsor for the Queen to view. Florence Nightingale, now bedridden, asked for the picture to be taken to her bedside. Many people wanted to buy the picture, including the Prince of Wales, but Galloway refused them all, that is, until the Queen said that she would like it. The Queen was so delighted with the painting that she gave Elizabeth a diamond bracelet, and the painting remains in the royal collection today. Galloway insisted that Elizabeth paint another picture for him. The reviewers suggested that Elizabeth's success was a one-off, but it was not. For the following year, Elizabeth produced her next battle painting, this time of Waterloo. Here we have the 28th North Gloucestershire Regiment at Quatre-Bras on the 16th of June 1815, so prior to the actual battle, as it formed a square to receive the last charge of Marshal Ney's cavalry and the Polish lancers. Now, Elizabeth went to great lengths to achieve an accurate interpretation of the action. She read accounts of the battle. She saw Kinglake's model of the battle. She read that the 28th had formed a square in a field of particularly tall rye. So she went off in search of a field of rye. She visited Henley in July 1874, and there she actually bought a field of rye. And with the help of local children, she trampled it down just to get the effect of that corner there, the left-hand corner, the trampled down ryegrass in the foreground. For the horses, she visited Sanger's Circus, where two horses were made to lie down and flounder while she sketched them for the horse in the right foreground. Elizabeth said, this is my Elizabeth voice, "I wish to show what an English square looks like viewed quite close at the end of 2 hours of action when about to receive the last charge." I'll have a look at it close up. And here we've got the square. Colonel James Brown of the Royal Engineers invited her to Chatham to make studies of soldiers. 300 were paraded in full dress with knapsacks. They then formed a square for her to sketch. I'm sure that you could get them to do that now. She chose 8 soldiers as models. Colonel Brown had 5 of them sent to her studio in Brompton. The other 3 were deemed to be bad characters, not suitable to go to a lady's studio. She also used policemen as models, for unlike most men in the 1870s, they didn't have moustaches. A sergeant major of musketry also went to her studio to show her how to load the brown bess and how the men knelt in the front of the square to face the cavalry. And Colonel Brown had a uniform made up for her. Elizabeth said, "I dread to think what blunders I might have committed. No civilian would have detected them, but the military would have been down on me." The painting was accepted by the Royal Academy, but this time it was hung in the lecture room, a dark room nicknamed the Black Hole. But when Elizabeth visited the exhibition, she wrote that she saw a dense, surging multitude before my picture. There were so many people looking at it, she couldn't even see it. The reviewers appreciated the historical accuracy that Elizabeth had gone to such pains to achieve. Even John Ruskin was impressed. John Ruskin, the great art critic of the time, he said, my John Ruskin voice, "I never approached a picture with more iniquitous prejudice against it than I did Miss Thompson's, partly because I've always said that no woman could paint. No, I wouldn't get on with him. And secondly, because I thought what the public made such a fuss about must be good for nothing. But it is Amazon's work, this, no doubt about it, and the first fine pre-Raphaelite picture of the battle we have had. Praise indeed. Back to the full picture. Is it coming? No. Well, let's do it that way then. Charles Galloway was delighted with the picture. So back to Elizabeth, here she is. Here's a photo that was taken of her. This was taken in Regent Street. 250,000 copies of that photo were sold. So why did this genteel Victorian lady choose to paint battle scenes? Why not pretty little cottages like Helen Allingham, or cute children like Helen Greenway, both fellow students at South Kensington? Well, I've been studying Elizabeth since 2006, and there's nowhere does she say or anyone else say I painted battle pictures, because there were various events in her life that may have influenced her decision. At the age of 14, she saw Garibaldi, the revolutionary leader, on the day before he landed in Sicily, along with his supporters, the Garibaldini. When she returned to England, she wrote that the volunteer movement was in full swing. And the Artists' Right was, of course, formed in 1859. But on her 19th birthday, her birthday treat, the family took her to visit Waterloo. Here's some sketches she did there in Belgium. At the battleground, they met an old man with a long white beard with a Waterloo medal, and he offered to guide them round Waterloo. He was Sergeant Major Munday of the 7th Hussars. Some battles were explained and relics were shown to them. Now, in her autobiography, she describes that day in great detail. So surely this visit to Waterloo was an influence on her choice of subject matter.
Mark, I'm watching a talk that I paid for on Lady Butler, the artist who did Waterloo and other places.
Finally, and importantly, she recorded in her diary that battle painting was a line of painting almost none exploited by English artists. Maybe she was just a very clever woman who saw a genre of painting that was in fact being neglected in Britain. Well, for her next painting, we're back to Crimea.
Yes, I haven't read the
Balaclava. This picture depicts the remnants of the Light Brigade returning from that disastrous charge during the Battle of Balaclava. The 24th of October, 1854, as a result of a misinterpretation of orders, a force of 660 British cavalry led by Lord Cardigan was reduced to 195 in just 20 minutes. Now, Elizabeth chose not to depict the charge of the Light Brigade as commemorated in Tennyson's poem, Riding into the Valley of Death, but instead she concentrated on the suffering of the soldiers. Again, she went to great effort to accurately portray the soldiers. An old sergeant of the 17th Lancers lent her his uniform, and Sergeant Major George Loy Smith of the 11th Hussars modelled for the bearded troop sergeant. And the actor W.H. Pennington posed as a central figure. He had been, himself had been a trooper in the 11th Prince Albert's own Hussars. Sadly, he created the only real criticism of the picture. It was too theatrical, said the critics, and she recounts in her autobiography the trouble she had with him. But apart from that, the picture was well received. It was exhibited at the private gallery of the Fine Art Society. The gallery charged a shilling to see it. The picture proved to be very popular. It toured the country. By the time it reached Liverpool in January 1877, 100,000 people had seen it. Other artists, of course, showed the actual battles, such as Woodville. He did this one much later. A very different depiction of the battle to Elizabeth's. Elizabeth didn't want to relish battle or to glorify war, and she made it a rule never to portray hand-to-hand combat. Well, back to Elizabeth again. Elizabeth continued to lead the life of a young woman of her class. She did the season, attending various social events, dinners, dances, and so on. Her mother hosted at homes on Wednesdays. Ruskin came, so did William Powell Frith. She had dinner with the Millets. Tissot was there. She went to the Lord Mayor's banquet with her father. And at a lunch, she met Major William Butler, the man who was to become her husband. But as soon as the season came to a close, she was back at work on her next picture, and we're back to Crimea with the return from Inkerman. Now, the battle had been won largely by the courage and determination of the men through hours of fighting. And this is what she wanted to show, those same soldiers after the battle. So here we have a ragged column of exhausted and wounded men as they trudge back to the camp from the heights of Inkerman on the 5th of November, 1854. They were mostly Coldstream Guards and 20th afoot, the Lancashire Fusiliers. Have a look at a close-up, and you could see the injured men. There's two there on the right who didn't make it at all. I knew this would happen. In the mud lies the Lancashire Fusiliers. The soldiers are shown exhausted, some wounded. We've got one here being helped up. Another one there has injured his hand, a fellow soldier carrying his rifle. In the background here, they've clearly run out of stretchers, for they're carrying him on a blanket. She missed it. With this picture, she missed the academy. Apparently she had a cold, but she sold the painting to the Fine Art Society for 3,000 guineas. Where it was exhibited for 4 weeks with her other pictures. 3,000 guineas, that would equate to £200,000 today. But this time it attracted little attention from the reviewers. In 1877, Elizabeth Thompson married Major William Butler. William Butler was a Catholic Irishman from an impoverished family who'd made his way in the army without any help or influence. He was commissioned, here he is as a young ensign, into the 69th Regiment, the South Lincolnshires. His early service just reads like a boy's own adventure story. He'd already served in Burma, India, Canada, West Africa, South Africa by the time of their marriage. Here he is as a major. Now, Elizabeth gives us, there was no Hello magazine in those days, she gives us very little detail about her relationship with Major Butler in her autobiography, and he gives none in his. He merely says, 1877 was the year of my marriage. He doesn't say to whom or give us any other detail at all. Full stop, new paragraph. Elizabeth merely records that on the 3rd of March, she was engaged to be married to the author of The Great Lone Land. Now that was the book he wrote recounting his arduous journey through the Canadian Northwest on horseback, dog sled and foot. A journey of 4,000 miles. He wrote a report afterwards recommending the establishment of a well-equipped force of men, which led to the founding of the RCMP, the Mounties. Elizabeth was a good catch. She had just sold a painting for 3,000 guineas. And until the 1882 Married for Women's Property Act, all her earnings went to him. I've checked with the National Army Museum. He was paid £292 a year. They married in June 1877. Cardinal Manning conducted the service. They honeymooned in Ireland. William had been brought up in Tipperary. Now, though she painted this later, it shows the beauty of the landscape of Ireland where they honeymooned. And there she began her first painting as a married woman. Listed for the Connaught Rangers. Well, not an actual battle scene, but still with a military theme. It shows 2 Irish recruits being marched out of the glen by a recruiting sergeant followed by a private and 2 drummer boys of the 88th Regiment, the Connaught Rangers. The recruit on the left looks back at the ruined house. Is that his house, or did he come from a similar one? The recruits are shown in a kind of national dress of a jacket with long homespun sleeves and black hats. We'll look at a close-up of them. In contrast, the drummer boys in their red coats with the bright brass of the drum, maybe they looked attractive. This was a subject that would please her husband. He was born in 1838 and he had lived through the years of the Irish famine. He was very concerned about the continued poverty of the peasant farmers, many of whom were forced by that poverty to enlist in the British Army. As the wife of an army officer, Elizabeth was now required to follow her husband as he was posted around Britain and abroad. It was not long before she fell pregnant, but sadly she lost her first child, Mary Patricia. William took her abroad to aid her recovery. They went to Lourdes and then on to Switzerland. However, in the ensuing years, she went on to have 5 more children. William's next posting was to South Africa, to Durban. War was looming in Zululand. Left behind, Elizabeth began work on an 8-foot canvas of the Afghan War. This immensely sad picture commemorates one of the worst disasters of British military history. Very briefly, Britain believed that the Russians were planning to invade India through Afghanistan. The British Governor-General in India, Lord Auckland, ordered the East India Company Army into Afghanistan under the command of General Elphinstone, who by then was 60 years of age. There, the British found the rugged mountainous terrain harsh and inhospitable. They were continually attacked by Afghan tribesmen, but eventually managed to reach Kabul. But once there, the force was attacked again. And finally, a retreat was negotiated with Akbar Khan. But he broke his word. The army was repeatedly attacked as it retreated along the 60 miles of snow-covered passes to the fort at Jalalabad. When Dr. William Bryden, shown here, an assistant surgeon in the Bengal army, arrived alone at the gates of Jalalabad, it was thought that he was the sole survivor of a force of 16,500 soldiers and camp followers. A few others eventually struggled through to the fort. Punch magazine declared this as the picture of the year. Other reviewers commentated on the details, the broken knees and bloodshot eyes of the pony, and the way the wounded surgeon clings to the saddle to prevent himself from falling. Here he is. One academician said it was impossible to look at that man's face unmoved. And there were reports of men with tears in their eyes looking at the picture. The Royal Academy exhibited both her Afghan picture and the recruitment of the Connaught Rangers in 1879. Elizabeth was delighted to be welcomed back to the Royal Academy. And here's the full picture. Oh, sorry, no, it's not. Remnants of the army have been likened to Jean-Louis Bissonnier's painting, which I'm going to show you now, depicting Napoleon riding at the head of his army as they retreated from Leon in 1814. I don't see much similarity, but the reason I'm showing it to you is that in the second half of the 19th century, Meissonier was generally considered to be the greatest of all battle painters. And so Elizabeth was delighted when Meissonier was quoted as having said, he said it in French, of course, I'll just stick to the English. England really has only one military painter, a woman. So praise indeed. Well, back to Elizabeth again. There was talk about her being elected to the Royal Academy. The rules of the Academy didn't bar women members, there just hadn't been any. The election was made up of 3 ballots. Elizabeth lost by 2 votes in the last ballot, and she was never nominated again. But we're up to 1879. It took till 1936 for there to be a woman Royal Academician named Laura Knight. Well, in the autumn of 1879, Elizabeth began work on Scotland Forever, but work on it was delayed when she received a royal commission. The Queen wanted a painting of a current military action. Elizabeth had never painted a current conflict before. The Queen wanted a picture of Rorke's Drift, the attack by Zulus on a hospital base. Well, the defence of the mission station at Rorke's Drift was one of the few redeeming features of the Zulu War of 1879. Briefly, as briefly as I can, on the afternoon of the 22nd of January, the garrison, made up of 84 men of the 2nd Battalion, the 24th 2nd Warwickshire Regiment, later to become the South Wales Borderers, so 84 fit infantrymen, 36 hospital cases, and a few others, under the command of Lieutenant Chard, Royal Engineers, was attacked by 4,000 Zulu warriors. Elizabeth had great difficulty finding any Zulu warriors in London. She found one black actor, and so she's just given the impression of the warriors approaching. Despite a succession of Zulu assaults on the mission, the attackers were repulsed. And after about 12 hours of fighting, the enemy retired. But for this engagement, 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded, the highest number for any single engagement. Some of these principal heroes were sent to her studio following a summons from Windsor Castle. Now, Elizabeth had never been faced with the task of including portraits of living people in her paintings, but she managed to include all 11 VC winners. We've got here, I'll highlight some of them. Here's Lieutenant Chard and Bromhead in the centre of the scene. On the right, we've got Private Hitch, and you can see he's one of the, has already been injured. You can see his shoulder bandage. He's carrying ammunition to the front. And then there's Surgeon Major Reynolds there with the white helmet helping an injured soldier. But next to him is Acting Commissariat Officer Dalton, who's just been shot. And on the left, 2 of the Joneses, Robert Jones and William Jones. The picture was accepted by the Royal Academy, but was placed in the lecture room where her quatre bras had been hung. But this time there were no crowds. The reviewers accused it of being theatrical. And true, I have to agree. I think it is her weakest picture, but in her defense, she had to get those 11 VC winners in so that everyone would be able to recognize them. But it doesn't matter what I think or what the critics thought. The Queen and the public were more than happy with them. Well, as you've probably already spotted, Elizabeth didn't choose the subjects from her paintings in any kind of chronological or historical order. She crisscrossed from battle to battle and country to country. In 1879, she returned to Waterloo with this vedette of the Scots Greys. Meanwhile, in 1880, William had been posted to Devonport. Elizabeth was now an army commander's wife and mother. Her daughter, also called Elizabeth, being born in 1879. At Devonport, her first son, Patrick, was born, followed by Richard and Eileen. But she still found time to paint. She restarted work on Scotland Forever. And at Devonport, she wrote that she had any amount of grey army horses as models. So this painting may have started as a study for the full picture. And here it is, perhaps their most famous painting, depicting the charge by the Scots Greys at the Battle of Waterloo. In her search for accuracy, she watched the Scots Greys charging during training exercises. And then she stood in front to see the effect as two troopers charged her, riding full tilt at her, pulling up within just 2 yards of where she stood, covering her in dust. Afterwards, she commented, "One cannot, of course, stop too long to see them close." I don't think I would have stood there at all. She was determined to give a realistic effect of the Scots Greys charging the French infantry at Waterloo. And of course, it was during the ensuing melee that Sergeant Hewitt captured the eagle from the French 45th Regiment, the Invincibles. Let's have a look at a close-up. She always said she didn't paint for the glory of war. So despite this picture being seen by many as a patriotic celebration, she maintained she wanted to convey the soldiers' experience of battle and their emotions from elation to sheer terror at the moment of charge. Well, you can see the different soldiers. That the soldier on the right seems to be having trouble controlling his horse. The bugler has lost his helmet. The soldier on the left of the ensign at the front has lost his helmet too, the one with red hair. But look at the horses. Their ears are back, their eyes are bulging, their nostrils are flared. They're fearful too. In 1882, her husband was posted to Egypt as a lieutenant colonel. Elizabeth stayed behind in Devonport with the children. Her daughter Elizabeth was not yet 3, Patrick was 2, and she was pregnant with Richard. With her young family, she was indeed a busy woman, but she still found time to paint. She found time to paint pictures of a high enough standard to be accepted by the Royal Academy. That year, she produced Floria Titona, a painting of an action in South Africa when 2 Eton officers, Monk and Elwes, were shot at Laing's Neck during the Transvaal War. The war was a humiliating disaster for the British, who hopelessly underestimated their enemy. And the British were, in fact, defeated at Laing's Neck. And here's the picture she did. I'm afraid it's not such a good quality. So maybe this wasn't such a good choice of subject. And the picture received some harsh reviews. It was regarded as one of the least successful of her paintings. But the reason I'm drawing your attention to it is that in June 2007, this painting sold for £50,400. Well, meanwhile, William was in Egypt, serving on Sir Garnet Wolsey's staff. On the 12th, Garnet Wolsey was preparing for the Battle of Tel El Kebir. On the 12th of September 1882, the Egyptian nationalist forces were in fact defeated at Tel El Kebir. Elizabeth commemorated the battle with a large picture. Against her husband's wishes, he did not want her to do this picture. And strangely enough, it was later destroyed with just this small portion remaining, showing Wolsey and William Butler. Later that year, William returned from Egypt and set off to Canada. Elizabeth was left on her own again. Being a father or a husband certainly wasn't going to interfere with William's idea of an adventurous lifestyle. He was back the following year. We're up to 1884 now. He's promoted to full colonel and posted back to Egypt to attempt to save General Gordon, who was besieged at Khartoum. The attempt was to be made via the Nile, and William organised the building and transportation of 400 boats for his relief, and then led the attempt himself. But they arrived too late. Gordon had been beheaded. William returned home in the June of 1885, deeply hurt at the failure to rescue Gordon, but he went back to Egypt in the September. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued to paint. And here's a picture she did. Those of you with very good eyesight will see that it's right at the bottom. It says 1925. And this is because the original picture that she did in 1884 was lost, probably during one of their moves. So she repainted it exactly the same. And this is a better version of it. This reflects an incident that William recounted to Elizabeth how just before the Battle of Guinness, in which he was leading a brigade, they were out in the desert, the moon was full, the dervishes were sniping at long range, and when they heard in the distance a Highland lament, the Cameron Highlanders approached, bearing the body of an officer who died earlier that day of a fever, his body covered in a Union Jack. And this is what she's depicted. In November 1885, Elizabeth set off to join William in Cairo, taking with her 2 of the children. She loved Egypt. Here's a sketch from her book of their time there. They travelled widely. This is the boat they sailed in, the Fostad. They sailed up the Nile. They went to Luxor, Aswan, Philae, Nubia. But in July 1886, William Butler was invalided home from his post in Egypt, and the Butler family went to live in an old farmhouse in Brittany, in Dinan. Here's a picture she painted there. Now, why would they go to France? Well, the move was made in order to avoid the publicity of a notorious high society divorce, Campbell versus Campbell, in which William was cited as one of the 4 correspondents of the Duchess of Argyll. I know you want to know who the others are. Well, there's a famous surgeon called Tom Bird, the chief of London's fire department, he was Captain Shaw, and the Duke of Marlborough's son, Lord Blandford. William Butler refused to testify at the trial. It was held in November and December of 1886. Reports of the case were reported in the papers each day. Public opinion was outraged. It was suggested that his refusal to testify proved his guilt. It was a difficult time for them both. But strangely, Elizabeth doesn't refer to it in her autobiography, merely saying that they went to live in an old farmhouse in Brittany to give the children the habit of talking French. And not so strangely, William doesn't refer to it at all in his autobiography. Well, here's the picture that she did there. Now, the scandal didn't seem to damage William too much, for in 1888 he was knighted. And it didn't seem to damage their marriage too much either, as their 3rd son, Martin, was born whilst they were in France. But Elizabeth still found time to paint, producing this picture. It shows the French dragoons during the Franco-Prussian War. Again, seeking accuracy, dragoons in uniform were invited to the house to model. Her son records in his book how he heard them stomping up the stairs with their spurs rattling. Now, it's unusual for Elizabeth in that it includes women and children. The woman on the left here in the gold dress is a self-portrait. That's Elizabeth with her daughter, also called Elizabeth. And next to them almost is Patrick and Richard, the 2 sons. Here's the full picture. Incidentally, this picture was sold in 2015 at Christie's, and it was sold for 48,000. I went to have a look at it, but I didn't buy it. From France, they went to live in Ireland, where Elizabeth finally chose to paint a non-military topic. Now, this painting is at University College Dublin. It's a wonderful painting. They clearly don't think very much of it because they put it in the admin, in a corridor in the admin department of the folk department of the university. So it's difficult to get a good picture of it, but up close it's very good. You can see she's standing barefoot in front of her house, which has been burnt to the ground. There's some furniture lying in a rubble, a chair, a table, cooking pot. In the background, her husband has been marched off by the militia. Evicted highlighted the conditions of the rural poor, and the picture was based on an incident that she'd actually witnessed. She was influenced by her husband, who recalled the hard times during his youth during the famine of the 1840s and 50s. And there were many evictions. By the late 1880s, such evictions were less common, but they had become a central issue of British politics and a particular concern of the Irish Home Rule movement and of Sir William. The painting was hung at the Royal Academy, but she didn't see it because on the 24th of March, Elizabeth went to Egypt. Sir William had been posted to Egypt again in 1890, this time to command the garrison at Alexandria. And on the 24th of March, Lady Butler went to join him. Elizabeth visited Egypt 4 times from 1890. She returned home in June each year when it got too hot, and then she went back again in November. Whilst there, they took a 9-day cruise along the newly opened Suez Canal, opened in 1869. They admired the engineering feat of the canal, but she wrote that she was dismayed at the miserable villages and the forlorn land they passed through. In April 1891, she and Sir William travelled to the Holy Land in Palestine. Here's a picture of the Gardens of Gethsemane taken from her book, Letters from the Holy Land. Both she and her husband loved visiting the places and sites that they knew so well from their Bible. Therefore, faith was important to them both. The tour was a kind of pilgrimage, but she didn't submit a painting of any of the sites they saw to the Royal Academy. Instead, she went back to battle painting. Now, as I said earlier, her paintings weren't produced in any kind of historical record of the 19th century battles, and the battles she produced were not in chronological order. In 1891, she looked back to Napoleon's campaign in Spain as the earliest conflict that she recorded. This shows the gun team of the RHA, Royal Horse Artillery, carrying wounded soldiers during Sir John Moore's retreat to Corunna in the winter of 1808-9. She sent it back to England for exhibition. It was well placed at the Academy, but it didn't sell. She thought perhaps it was too sad a subject. Well, I certainly wouldn't want it over my mantelpiece. Whilst in Alexandria, she witnessed the Camel Corps at the charge. As she had done with the Scots Greys, she watched the charge head on. Again, she stood in front as they charged. Those 300 camels charged her. You can't fault her courage. She worked on the picture in Ireland and then took it back to Egypt to finish it in oil. Here's the finished picture in oils. It was hung at the Royal Academy in 1893, but it didn't find a buyer. In fact, she kept that picture right for the rest of her life, right to the very end. In November 1893, Sir William was posted to Aldershot. Elizabeth wrote in her autobiography, "It's a far cry from Cairo to Aldershot. I know just the feeling." At Aldershot, she and her husband developed a friendship with Empress Eugenie, the widow of Napoleon III, and of course the mother of the Prince Imperial who was killed during the Zulu Wars. 3 years later, Sir William, now a Major General, was posted to Dover, where she began to study the fifes and drums. This shows the drummer boys of the 57th West Middlesex Regiment waiting under fire for the order to advance during the Peninsular War at the Battle of Albuera on the 16th of May, 1811, some of whom seem to be about 10 years old. I know she used her own sons as models, and I wonder whether the young one here, for close up, I wonder if this is Martin, the youngest one, and the two looking at each other. like to think are Patrick and Richard, but I can't prove it. Elizabeth was pleased to see that the West Middlesex wore little yellow jackets rather than red. She was quite pleased to get away from all that red. The painting was submitted to the Royal Academy, which gave it a place of honour. Now, I've been studying Elizabeth for a long time, over 15 years, and I've had great difficulty in finding any insight into Elizabeth's character. There's very little information in her diaries and autobiography, but she clearly had a sense of humour, I think anyway. She recounted how at the exhibition showing her Afghan picture, a man came up to her and said, "I had a wet eye when I saw your picture." She looked at him and saw that he had one brown eye and one blue eye. She said she had to stop herself asking which one, the brown or the blue. At Dover, she and her husband were required to entertain official visitors. Another insight into Elizabeth's character is revealed in her autobiography when she wrote, "It's my misfortune that I have not the knack of small talk, so useful to official people." She was clearly more comfortable in front of her easel. In 1898, Sir William was posted to South Africa. Left behind, Elizabeth began her next painting. Still focusing on the Peninsular War, she produced On the Morrow of Talavera, showing soldiers of the 43rd Regiment, the Oxford Light Infantry. This depicts the aftermath of the first great victory of the Peninsular War on Spanish soil by the British Army under the direction of Lieutenant General the Honourable Sir Arthur Wellesley, later of course to become the Duke of Wellington. The soldiers are shown carrying an injured bugler. You can see the bugle lying on his torso. In the background, Wellington is saluting him. Behind Duke's sympathy with soldiers was well known, and this picture shows that. The painting was very kindly placed at the Royal Academy, she wrote, but attracted no comment from the art critics. Her next painting was a commission from the Scots Guards. We're back to Crimea here. This illustrates a famous incident at the Battle of Alma on the 20th of September 1854 during the Crimean War. When under fire from the Russians, Captain Lindsay stood firm with the regimental colours, which were shot through and the staff broken. She met Captain Lindsay and asked him about it. Sir William had been posted to South Africa as Commander-in-Chief and High Commissioner during the absence of Sir Alfred Milner. In this capacity, he tried to avert a war and to alert the government to their inadequacy of their preparations. William's attitude did not go down well. Elizabeth went to join him in South Africa with 3 of the children. The 2 eldest boys were at school. William's efforts to prevent a war were unsuccessful. Instead, he was accused of pro-Boer sympathies, and he was forced to resign his command in September 1899. The war began the following month. They returned to England and Sir William took command of Western District, and so it was back to Devonport. But William was vilified in the press, and Elizabeth wrote that she intercepted the vilest anonymous letters. At Devonport, she was busy in her role as the wife of commander, receiving various official visitors, but nevertheless continued to paint, including this picture of a dispatch rider riding under fire from marksmen, galloping across the veldt. Was well placed at the Academy, but despite the topicality of the subject, it was poorly reviewed in the 1903 Royal Academy exhibition, I think partly because of who her husband was. In 1905, she exhibited a painting of the Second Afghan War. Whoever thought we'd have a third? This is thought to represent the action at Maiwand on the 18th of July, 1880, when the British Army was forced to retreat from the Afghan force. under the covering fire of the RHA. Again, Elizabeth doesn't show the actual battle, but the rescue of the wounded soldiers. Excuse me. She again shows the courage of the men who, at great risk to themselves, rescued their fellow soldiers, saving them from capture by the Afghans. In October 1905, having reached the age of 67, Sir William was placed on the retired list, very image of a proper Major General. Excuse me. They returned to Ireland. They lived at Banshire Castle in County Tipperary, where Sir William was made a member of the Irish Privy Council and was also a supporter of the Home Rule movement. He died 5 years later in 1910, aged 72. He's been a man of great personal charm, champion of the weak and oppressed, a talented author of nearly 20 books, how he found the time, but the books reflected his love of adventure. And he'd been Elizabeth's husband for 33 years. He was buried at Killardrick in County Tipperary, and there's an inscription on the wall of the cemetery. The following year, she attended her son Richard's ordination as a priest in Rome. In 1914, the First World War began. Elizabeth painted a series of khaki pictures. Here's one of her watercolours, showing a column of infantry and a horse-drawn ambulance passing a roadside cavalry. It depicts men returning from the front. Her own sons all served in the war. Her eldest son, Patrick, was ADC to General Capper, commander of the 7th Division. Richard, the priest, became an army chaplain, and Martin was attached to the 2nd Royal Irish. This was a war that was too close for comfort for any mother. Patrick was severely wounded at Ypres in 1915. Richard had a narrow escape at the Battle of Flanders. He was tending wounded and dying soldiers with Father Knapp. The old priest told him to go and get some rest. But when he returned, he found a shell had hit the priest. In 1917, she painted a picture of an action in Libya. Here she shows the Dorset yeomanry galloping across the desert with swords drawn, charging the Zanussi tribesmen. They're armed with machine guns. Elizabeth's last exhibited painting was this one, A Retreat from Mons, showing a squadron of weary, wounded soldiers retreating from the action, their faces reflecting the drama they've undergone. Here's a close-up of it. This was her last exhibit at the Royal Academy. She had exhibited a total of 24 pictures at the Royal Academy. Not bad for a woman who couldn't paint. After the armistice, Lady Butler continued to live at Banshire Castle in County Tipperary. This is where Banshire Castle. She continued to paint. She painted in that turret on the right-hand side. But in 1922, this frail, deaf widow of a great supporter of the Irish Home Rule movement had her house sequestered by the Republicans. She was forced to leave. She left all her belongings and walked out and went to live with her younger daughter, Eileen, who by now was Viscount Gormanston, and they lived at Gormanston Castle in County Meath. As a woman, she had never witnessed a battle. Her style of painting looked dated, as artists such as Woodville produced scenes of fierce combat. John Nash was an official artist with the artist rifles, and he was at Marcoing, showing here trench warfare, which epitomizes the reality of this trench warfare, of this terrible warfare. Paul Nash painted it in a completely different style, trench warfare again. And finally, Christopher Neverson called this the paths of glory. But there is no glory in war. Elizabeth Butler, died at Gormanston Castle on the 2nd of October, 1933, in her 87th year. She was buried at the nearby village of Stamulham. Her obituary in the Times included a quotation summing up her attitude to her subject matter. Thank God, I never painted for the glory of war, but to portray its pathos and heroism. If I had ever seen a corner of a real battlefield, I could never have painted another war picture. Thank you very much. I think that's the end. Just stop press for one moment, because last month, at the end of last month, a painting by Elizabeth Butler was sold for £325,250 in London. Finally, the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicity. That was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I thought that was excellent. If you want to demute yourselves, please ask questions. Felicity, I got two questions for you.
Yes, indeed.
The first question is, in the Crimean War pictures, I noticed birds in the pictures.
Yeah.
Is there anything strange about that? Is there some sort of hidden meaning to the birds?
I must say I'm not awfully keen on the birds. I don't think they add anything to it, but they are all black. You could interpret it as depicting the sadness of war, or you could sort of think of it as, you know, they're flying away and the Russians were retreating. But I don't know of any other significance than that. I don't think they add much to it.
Right. And the other question I want to ask you about is the signature. Why did you show that? I mean, obviously it was
Elizabeth's signature. Well, there is a bit of a story that goes with this. I was trying to get hold of Elizabeth Butler's autobiography, which was published in 1922. And back in 2006, when I was studying her, that was the only way I could get hold of a copy. So I searched and searched, and I looked on the internet, and I went to eBooks and all the other websites, and just couldn't find a copy. I spent hours looking. My studies upstairs, went downstairs to my husband, and I said, I just can't get a copy. And he said, oh, we'll try again tomorrow night. So up I went the following night, and I spent hours looking, searching everywhere I could think of that I might be able to get a copy, and couldn't. And I found a copy in Philadelphia, £50 plus postage. I thought, well, that's a bit steep. And so on the third night, I persevered and I tried every way I could think of, and I found a copy in the next village to me, 4.5 miles away.
Yeah.
When I got it home, I found that it was a signed copy. I never quite remember to go back and tell them that they sold me a signed copy. And interestingly, inside was a slip of paper where she has listed all the paintings that remained in her house when she walked out, which is how I know that she never ever sold the painting of the camel corps, because I've got the list here. That was in the dining room. I haven't been back to tell the bookstore that either. So that is her signature, signed copy in January.
Anybody else with some questions? I must admit, there was one picture. Well, I mean, all her pictures are extremely good, but there's one picture which I thought was quite modern. I mean, it was in the Peninsular War, I think. Some soldiers around a Union Jack, and there was sort of smoke around it. And I thought, crikey, that could have been painted really quite recently. It was a sort of, it wasn't a sort of a stage Victorian picture, it was a modern picture, and that sort of slightly threw me.
I think her husband being in the army, that she was able to get scenes reenacted for her. Well, I know she did. Where the soldiers coming back from South Africa, where she got them to pose for her, and others were posed for her. No, she didn't go to the war, to any of the battles. She was too old to go to the First World War. She's well in her 60s by then, and of course she was a woman. So yes, they were reenacted for her. But,
yeah, I mean, I understand that it was more the style of the painting rather than the actual.
Yes.
I mean, it absolutely light years ahead of. But the other thing which I found was interesting was he was very successful in his own right. I mean, you know, he was quite forward thinking. He, you know, believed in home rule. He saw the problems coming up with the Boer War. He was quite a character, but they were obviously, you know, in love. They, you know, 33 years of marriage and 5 children or whatever.
Yeah.
But you know, their diaries say, well, we got married and that was it. But I suppose that's what the Victorians were like in those days.
Yeah, you mustn't give anything away. I gave a talk to the Butler family, and they gathered 27 members of the family together. So we had the people down from Leeds, from Brussels, from Bristol, home counties and so on. And the youngsters, there were 3 young people there who were at university, and they didn't know anything about Elizabeth Butler. They knew about General Butler, and you know what a great man he was, and his books and so on, but they didn't know anything about her, which I just feel it my role to tell people about Lady Butler. And I think she was an accomplished artist, I really do. I mean, she painted other things. She's known for her battle pictures, but she did some lovely watercolors of scenery in Ireland. I think stand up and be counted, Elizabeth Butler.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
David, have you got any questions?
No, I just thought that the whole display of her paintings are absolutely marvelous. I imagine they're all split up and sort of all over the world. I don't imagine there's a gallery holding a number of them, is there?
No, they are all over the world. I've got them in Australia, South Africa. There's no collection. The Queen has 5 of them in the Royal Collection.
Right.
In Ireland, in the Army Staff College, in some messes, Taunton Museum, Bury, Manchester.
Yes, all over, as you say. Yes.
National Gallery of Australia, all over the place.
Yeah.
I have a list.
I was most impressed with the paintings themselves. I thought they were fantastic.
And they were very well thought of by the military at the time. And she was very keen to make sure they were accurate.
Yeah, that's true. That's important. Yeah. Very good talk. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Linda, do you have any questions?
Yes, I just wondered, could you recommend a book, Felicity, that features some of the work that you've just shown us? I'd love to actually get to know her a bit more. You've really inspired me this evening. I recognise the pictures, but I didn't realise who painted them. So I'd like to perhaps get a nice book.
Well, it's very few books. Her biography was finally reissued after my great efforts to get a copy of the original. So there is her autobiography that's been reissued. It's not a great work of literature, but she does talk about her life. I have written a biography of her, but I haven't been able to get mine published. But another lady did a few years ago, has written a biography of her. It's a very expensive book, but I haven't read it because I'm too wounded.
I'd rather read yours, so I'll wait to be published.
one day. The only other one is that in 1986 there was an exhibition at the National Army Museum of her work, and that lists is a catalogue really of the paintings that were shown. So there is some more detail about her, but not very much actually.
I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much, Felicity.
Thank you.
Just to say, it's not a question really, but I grew up when I used to visit my grandparents, there was a picture of Rorke's Drift.
Right.
And
right.
John Chard was my great uncle. So,
Right.
and in fact, near the picture, it was a copy of the picture, obviously, but was the VC and also the campaign medal, which is now in the Imperial War Museum.
Oh, right.
So I was really fascinated to hear
Yes,
what you had to
indeed.
say about the background to that, to the first one that she painted, sort of a recent conflict.
A direct connection. Oh, of course, we all remember the film, don't we?
We do indeed, yes. Stanley Baker played my ancestor.
She also painted a whole lot of portraits of VC winners. I don't know whether.
Oh right, you don't know where they are, do you?
No, I don't. To be quite honest, all over the place. I suppose they were given to the recipients. I'm not sure. But
Oh, there you are. You've given me a task.
There you are. You see.
Thanks again.
Not at all.
Margaret, do you have any questions? You've got to demute yourself, either Margaret or Simon. Oh, there we are.
Yes. No, not really. Just to say that I believe one of the Crimean paintings is in Hull in the Ferrens Art Gallery.
Yes, yes, I'm talking to the actual people. I hand out a list of where they are and how big they are and when they were painted. And the Scotland Forever, her most famous painting, is in Leeds. And I went up there to see it. And they don't seem to be very proud of it. It's hung high up on the wall. You really can't get a good look at it. The Return from Inkerman is at Ferrens Art Gallery in Hull. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they very kindly sent me some free postcards of it when I phoned them up about it.
Oh, did they? Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Felicity, do you know who purchased The Dawn of Waterloo?
I don't know. I was following it very carefully because Christie's notified me that it was up for sale. I just didn't have a spare 325,000 to be quite honest. But they won't reveal who bought it. I'm guessing it went to a private person, you know, that otherwise would be hearing of it going into a museum or art gallery.
I'm sure you're right.
It's a very dark picture. I had great difficulty lightening that up so that you could see it. Here it is. Yes, quite a strange one, that one.
But I imagine that is quite accurate because I think it rained heavily before the battle.
Yes. Yes, it did. Yes, that's true, isn't it?
So, I mean, you got the rain clouds on the left-hand side, and
absolutely,
you know, if you're wet and cold, you're pretty miserable. So, the dark atmosphere is probably about right.
Yeah, and I should think they were hungry.
Yes. Yeah.
Cold.
Yeah. 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 Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
That's the first picture she exhibited, and her father modelled for that, but that was rejected. That was the one that was rejected, sadly. And sorry, that's the very first one, and that was the second one. So she started right from the word go, painting military scenes, but quite capable of. That was where William lived. She also painted some goats. So she was capable of painting other things. There's another one. Yeah, lots of them. But there's, you see, I think that's a lovely painting.
Yeah.
Landscape there, and another one. Another one. That one I love. It's a bit
Yeah.
like, oh, I can't think of his name, Paul Henry, the Irish painter. So she was capable of doing other things, but it was a military painting she liked. And I think that makes her interesting. Why would a woman paint battle scenes? So
Very talented lady.
Very,
Talented.
very.
Yeah. So any more for any more? Because I know Felicity wants her gin and tonic.
No, thank you very much. That was
Friday
truly
night,
wonderful.
gin and tonic night.
Truly great. Thank
Excellent
you.
evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you very much indeed. That was
Not at
absolutely
all. I
marvellous.
hope you enjoyed it.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Certainly did. Thank you.
I'm going to go now. I'll switch off.
Right, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
Yes.
And,
Thank you, James.
And have a very good weekend all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very much.
See you again.
Nice to
Bye.
see you. Bye, David. Bye, Margaret.
Bye. Thank you. I can't get it to go.